Next up, I'd like to welcome Barry Kushner. Barry's performed this talk at public meetings, trade unions and academic groups, and tonight he's going to talk to us about the economy, the untold story.
The economy, the untold story. Are we in a debt crisis, or is it just another story? Is it just an overwhelming narrative? And let's face it, we know what it is. If we're in a sovereign debt crisis, we've got to make cuts. There's no alternative. That's what we're given. Except there are a lot of people who disagree with that, including Paul Krugman, who's a Nobel Prize winning economist, who says jobs now, deficit later was and is the right strategy. It's just that these views are not well aired. So let's have a look at our debt and our deficit and just see what we can make of it. Well, our GDP, which is where we need to start, our national income, is £1.52 trillion. That's what we earn in our country in 1 year. Our debt, as a percentage of that, is 60%. It's £920 billion. Well, is that a lot? Is it small? Is it manageable? Is it not? Well, let's go and find out. We're told, come on, hurry up. We're told that our national debt, this is one of the myths that we're led to believe, is our debt is the highest that it's ever been. We can't survive in the level of debt that we've got, and it's creating a sovereign debt crisis. But if we actually look at the facts, remembering that our debt is 60% of our GDP, well, that's the EU limit. The EU limit is 60%. We're within that, and one of the few countries in the EU that are. More than that, our debt has only been higher 50 years out of the last 250 years. And drawing your attention to this graph, the peak there is 1945. Our debt then was 270%. Actually, that's wrong, that. 270% of our GDP. That was in 1945. We built the welfare state. And our debt is even lower than all our trading partners. So our debt nationally doesn't appear to be high, does it? So let's move on to deficit, which the government like to talk about. The deficit, they tell us, is caused by overspending. And more than that, it's got to be paid off in 5 years, it will be, funnily enough, by the time of the next election. Well, let's just understand what deficit is. It's made to sound quite complicated, but actually it's quite simple. There's the government in the middle. You've got income coming in on one side. You've got spending going out mainly on public services on the other. So there's two sides to this, isn't there? There's spending on one side, there's income on the other. Is spending too high or income too low? Our deficit at the moment is about £143 billion. And bear in mind it was £38 billion in 2007. So what does this mean, and where did this deficit come from? Well, it came from the credit crunch and the problems that we had in our economy as a result of that. Businesses were closing, growth plummeted by around 10%. And because of that, people were made unemployed. Unemployment went up by 1 million. By 1 million. Spending stayed the same. People weren't paying taxes, 1 million of them. A lot of them were claiming benefits. So the income to the government went down. That's where the deficit came from. If you have a look at this, this tells us that if you look at what the tax take is today compared to what it should have been had the economy continued to grow as it had been for the last previous 15 years, there's a tax gap of £100 billion. So it's not overspending, it's a cash flow problem. So its growth increased our deficit so it can reduce it. And as a result of the fiscal stimulus, the last Labour government up to March 2010, there was growth of 1.5%. And as a result of that, our deficit, instead of being £167 billion, came in at £145 billion. £22 billion less than was forecast. What's more, we're told that servicing our debt, paying the interest payments on our debt, is expensive. £120 million a day, we're told, which equates to £43 billion a year. Well, Thatcher's government paid nearly twice as much as that. Twice as much than that. She paid £174 million a day, the equivalent of. And that tells us that our debt, borrowing is cheap, and it's over a long period of time, 15 years. And what's more, the UN are telling us that the income inequality is such that there's a lot more capacity amongst higher income earners to pay more tax. But let's compare it to the bank deficit. Everything that we've got that we do to support the banks and all the bailout schemes create the bank deficit, which is valued at around £955 billion. And that That is the equivalent of our GDP. That's how we valued the bank deficit. But how are we treating that? Are we telling the banks they've got 4 years to repay that £955 billion? No, we're not. The National Audit Office are telling us that deficit and that debt to the bank will go on for many years to come, and it's costing us £5 billion a year to service it, and it might cost us more. So we're willing to invest in the banks. Why aren't we willing to invest in our own public services and our own country to get our country moving? So the national debt is historically low, deficit is affordable, and deficit reduces with growth. Our debt might be high, it might not be high. In 1945 it was 270%, and we managed it then and built our welfare state, and we can do it again in 2011. Thank you very much.